Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us and joining the Maryland Life Sciences Bioinnovation Conference. This panel of colleagues and others across Maryland is really going to look at the topic of human resources as a strategy, building a team to ensure success and to attract investors. My name is Sally Elaine. I'm the head of JLabs at Washington, D.C. and part of Johnson & Johnson Innovation. We're here in Washington, D.C. launching our No Strings Attached incubator at the new Children's National Research and Innovation Campus, and we will be open in January of 2021. What we really want to do here is give access to entrepreneurs and startups to a no strings attached model where we can help you move your science and technology forward faster. With that, I just want to highlight again what this session will discuss. We really want to look at how to build a team to ensure success. We're going to focus on the key roles within startup companies, developing boards, what to look for when partnering with investors and other companies, and the shift of expertise when transitioning from an early stage company to a public company. I'm going to start today's session by introducing our panelists, and I'll ask each panelist to highlight their current positions and their roles within their organization. First, I'd like to introduce Ellen Huckelhoven. She's the Managing Director at Perceptive Advisors. Ellen?
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today. So Perceptive Advisors is a biotechnology-focused fund that was founded by Joseph Edelman about 20 years ago in 1999. We invest in biotech companies, both private and public. I like to say if we like to follow the science. If we like the science, we'll figure out a way to invest in it. We have other investment vehicles too, not just equity. We also do debt financings. We have a China company that in-licenses Chinese rights. We've launched a few SPACs of our own, so we've been really creative on the financing side in the healthcare space. I've been at Perceptive for 8 years. I'm a managing director. I run I lead our biotech therapeutics arm, I guess, of the investments here, and have been doing that for the last few years. My background is a PhD in cancer biology from Memorial Sloan Kettering. What else can I tell you? That's basically it.
Great, thanks, Ellen. Our second panelist is Ken Mills. He is the president and CEO of REGENXBIO. Ken?
Thanks, Sally. Appreciate the opportunity to participate on this panel with all of you. And little introduction to REGENXBIO. We're a gene therapy company based today in Rockville, Maryland, focused on gene therapy and the curative potential of gene therapies, in particular in vivo gene therapies based on adeno-associated viruses. Indications that we focus on in our pipeline today are pretty vast, including things like wet age-related macular degeneration, as well as pediatric neuronal disorders, including lysosomal storage diseases. We also have a whole host of partners, including partners that are currently marketing commercially approved products, such as Novartis's Zolgensma for the treatment of spinal muscular atrophy, which is about to become, I think, the first gene therapy blockbuster product, and from which REGENXBIO receives royalties. A little bit about my journey and sort of the background of REGENXBIO. We formed the company actually in Washington, D.C. in 2009. Went through a whole chapter, several years of partnering, new company formation and licensing, including with a number of venture-backed early-stage companies such as Avexis, Audentis, Voyager, and Dimension, all of which later became publicly traded companies. We ourselves took our first meaningful investment from angel investors in the DC area, but later on, in fact, in the beginning of 2015, we initiated a series of external financings, starting with a Series C financing in January of 2015 that was led by groups such as Venrock and Deerfield and Bain Capital. We relocated the company out to Rockville, been growing here ever since. We then did a Series D financing with Perceptive, led by them and others. and went public in an IPO in September of 2015. And since then have been focused on building a team, building capabilities, and delivering on the promise of gene therapy.
Great. Thanks, Ken. And lastly, I'd like to introduce one of my colleagues from Johnson & Johnson Innovation, Claire Laurent. She's a principal in our venture investments group, JJDC.
Oh, yes, I want to say first that I'm very excited to be part of this panel and looking forward to have good conversation. And so in brief, so I'm Claire, as you just said, Sally. I'm with JJDC. So JJDC is the venture investment entity within Johnson & Johnson Innovation. And so we partner with our colleagues from business development, external reach, GLab, so we can design for the opportunities we meet and the companies we meet, the best plan to partner on the long term. So specifically, JJDC makes equity investment in different forms, and we invest across the various stage of companies, from seed stage to even public companies. We are interested in working on new codes, whether the IP or ideas come from internal research or from academic centers. So that's a very broad activity, and really the design of each deal is going to be customized based on the opportunity in front of us. A big part of our job is really to connect internally, not only with the external reach and partnering colleagues, but also with the R&D teams and commercial teams to see where are the strategic interests of Johnson & Johnson Enterprise today, and how can the external environment complement or augment the business opportunities. And we're really going after win-win situations. More about JJDC, we've been around for 46 years. That's one of the old corporate venture. We are very proud of our reputation being reliable and present for the companies we invest in. We invest $500 million a year in 40, for example, last year it was 40 investments, 20 new and 20 follow-ons. We are global. And it's a small team though, so very approachable. We are only 12 investors, and with the back office we have 30. So that's a relatively small team for a big playground. And more on myself, I'm a biologist by training, spent 15 years doing R&D myself, and transitioned to corporate venture only 3 years ago. Spent some time in the healthcare IT with Samsung Venture, and happily joined JJDC and Johnson & Johnson 8 months ago.
Great. Thanks so much, Claire. And thanks everyone for the introduction. For those of you that were joining, just to let you know, we've reserved time at the end for audience Q&A, and we really encourage you to post your questions, as we really do want this to be an interactive session once we get through some initial questions. We encourage you to put those questions into the chat box at the bottom, and we'll look through those questions and answer them at the end. If you have specific questions for panelists, please go ahead and identify that. If you have something related that you'd like to connect with a panelist on afterwards, we'll be able to drop our contact details at the end of the session as well. So let me move to the first question. We've sort of divided this conversation today into different topic areas. And the first one we wanted to dive into was on key roles within startups and early stage companies. So let me ask the first question. Maybe if I could ask you, Ellen, what are the key roles you see within startups, and what are you looking for to invest?
A good question. I think it depends. Not to dodge it, but it really depends on what stage the company is at and what is important to get them to the next stage. So if that, often if it's a private company or an earlier stage company, they have a bunch of preclinical data, maybe from an academic really early on. And so making sure that data can get transferred to CROs or to in-house labs or whatever it is, and that they can plan the next preclinical experiments, and having strong scientists who've had some experience doing that is important. I think one area that a little bit later stage companies who are starting to do the clinical development really struggle with is finding good clinical developers, because a lot of them are in pharma companies. A lot of the ones who've had experience in biotech, it's hard to recruit those to early stage small companies. And so I think when a company does have someone who has experience, and not just experience, but actually success in that area, like understands how to set up clinical trial sites and how to drive enrollment and really get things moving, is really important, so that you don't get delays to those first proof of concept data sets. Because I'm always thinking, what's the probability of success? How can we de-risk that probability of technical success? And to get there, we need more data. So it's very data focused. So that's kind of on the clinical side. On the CMC side, I think that's another thing that, I'm sure Ken thinks about a lot. It's very important for gene therapy, but if it's a gene therapy company or a complex product or cell therapy or something like that, not just a small molecule, I think having very strong CMC experts who have experience in that field, once again, is helpful. And ideally ones who can recruit a good team underneath them, because often as investors, I don't have visibility to the lower ranked people. And, so having a strong leader in place who can recruit everything that's needed is really important for us. So everything, they're all important. It's good to have.
Right. And I imagine as companies shift through the pipeline too, those roles might look different, right? As you mentioned, as you get towards clinical studies and CMC expertise is important. Maybe I can go to Claire. When you look at and start evaluating a company, what are sort of the key roles that you look at on the team?
Yeah, so definitely science, chief scientific officer, CEO, CFO, definitely with the road to grow the finance as well as the enterprise growth. And depending on the sectors, I'd say in some area you really need somebody in charge of compliance very early. Like in data science, for example, and chief medical officer may be needed for some companies early. Others can just make it as a chief scientific officer for some time. HR, as the company grows, is definitely important. Yeah, these are the things I'm thinking of.
Thanks, Claire. Ken, would you like to add to those questions? And maybe talk about how the roles changed when you grew the company that you're with.
Yeah, I think Ellen and Claire have made some excellent points of emphasis. And, one of the clear themes is, it's case by case based on the strategy and plan of the company. I certainly have seen and had experience with companies or REGENXBIO wanting to move into particular areas of therapeutic development, and there really being an expectation, if not a demand, for expertise in that area. If you were going into NASH today, or you're going into retina, you want to have people who have that literal clinical development experience and a track record of success. And I think that sometimes that doesn't come forward in the early stages of a company because the person that sourced the technology or the people involved may have taken a different route and need to recruit that team or that talent. So I think starting, and I know the questions that I was asked early on in the development of a gene therapy company is, well, where's your team, where's your expertise going to come from, and how are you going to build that? And I'd say the truth is I think there's an experience set from the entrepreneur lens that a lot of investors, and I'm sure a lot of corporate investors as well as entrepreneur VC-based investors are looking for that track record and experience. If they can have it, that's a premium, right? Have you done something before? Have you taken it through multiple stages, or have you at least taken it through the next step of that sort of value inflection point overall? So, again, I think that case by case when it comes to the technology and the therapeutic area of focus out of the gate, what level of expertise, what level of depth and breadth. But a general theme overall is, have you established that you can build a team of talent and execute on a plan, independent of the therapeutic area as well. And the last thing I would add is, as companies emerge from sort of early stage where they, I think, tend to get a lot of support, right, Ellen and Claire, from things like their boards or, other advisors, eventually they have to go out on their own and sort of be one-on-one with new investors as well. And, what is that familiarity and comfort in the community of accessing additional capital? That's another question that I found, transitioning from very early stage to, first round of venture stage to public stage has a meaningful impact on, people and teams and companies.
Yeah, and that's something we definitely want to hit on in a few more questions and talk about that transition and how people may transition as companies move from an early stage to a bigger stage. Let me go back and ask Ellen, what are some of the watch outs that you see, or what are some failures that you've seen with companies building an early stage company?
I think not focusing on that clinical development part enough, and not hiring the right person, and time is money, right? And so if they make promises and generally over promising and under delivering on timelines, I think happens a lot because of that, and those are really intertwined, and that can be very frustrating. And we as investors, especially if we're looking at public market companies, we're usually used to getting guidance, and you better hit guidance on that timeline. If you didn't, it's a big red flag. What happened? What went wrong? And often in early stage companies and early clinical development, it's that they don't know how to recruit patients well. They don't know how to recruit the right patients. It's also very, very important that you get ones that are sick enough to show a benefit, but not so far gone that that you can't show a benefit because the therapy can't do anything anymore. And walking that line can be so difficult. And so finding someone who's really good at and has done it before and has interacted with clinicians to really guide the enrollment and not just push it through speed-wise, but also the quality, I think, is something that is really, really important, and something I really look for, because again, those first few patients of data and a lot of things that we look at really determine the success of the company and the program. So I think in that stage, it's a really critical one to get it right. There's lots of other examples too, but that's the one that's just top of mind and probably the most important for much of the stuff I look at.
Yeah, thank you. Ken, you were nodding your head. Is there something you could add to that?
I will try off mute to add something. I think that, again, there's this fantastic tension between experience, of a person and a team in general, and Ellen had alluded to before, she, as investors, sometimes, I know people aren't able to see sort of, deep into the company, but having confidence, not just in a person, but in that person's ability to put a team together that trusts one another is incredibly important, right? We all know that from our own work together. It's certainly true within inside companies. And so, I think my view has been that, you either can reconstitute, teams that have worked together before, and sometimes, sort of address some of those challenges of, new teams forming together and then being able to execute, or you need to, apply a reasonable lens to how companies are forming, and if they're planning to, sort of recruit de novo for a lot of positions, maybe a lot of talented and experienced people, but not a group of people that have worked together before, they can result in different outcomes. I've seen across different companies I've been involved with and we've been partners with, both work. I just think that an awareness about that for investors and for the leaders of the company, especially CEO, to communicate what that plan is and how you plan to sort of keep track of that is incredibly important.
Thanks, Ken. So it sounds like the CEO to provide great, important guidance, but then also due diligence on the individuals that they're hiring into their early stage startup. Claire, let me just go back and ask you, what are the potential watch outs you see? And maybe some flags that you see when companies are building their teams?
Yeah, too much of the same profile, like a team of clinicians with a great idea. They totally understand the unmet need. They are inspired. And so they will probably work very well together. However, they will really like that diversity in terms of profile. Same for other technologies. So too much of the same is a strong statement in terms of we know what we are doing, but it's going to be complicated to get things done in areas that are new. So that's definitely one. Another one is in the presentation of the pitch or in addressing question, lack of plasticity, and that's less of the hard skill, but more of the soft one that Ken was kind of referring to. There's a lot of flags that come through in conversations. The ability to stand and defend an approach, whether it's scientific or marketing, go-to-market or clinical plan, but to take questions or to show some kind of flexibility, resilience, agility on a team. That's definitely another one. Good things are definitely track records. And not only the good track records, like not only success definitely helps make decisions, right? This guy is a recurring entrepreneur. He's done it before. He will do it again. I know how he's doing when things are complicated as well, and it's going to work out. So this is very helpful, but also like difficult past experience, because you know that you are actually selecting a team that has been through challenges already. So they didn't dissolve. They keep working together, and so that's helpful.
Great, thanks, Claire. So I'm going to move on to, sorry, Ellen, go ahead.
I was going to add one more thing, because we haven't spent a lot of time talking about the CEO, because I thought it was an obvious answer. Of course, the CEO is extremely important. And to me, and Claire kind of reminded me of this, like, it's so important that the CEO understands both the business and the science. If I have a conversation with them and they, don't know where to go for the right answer, or just, don't have a solid understanding of the science that's backing it up, I find it a big red flag, especially in an early stage company. Later, obviously, if they're commercial and they're at a later stage, it can be a different thing. You just need a good manager. But, in this industry, that aspect is so important. And you need to, as a CEO, you need to be able to hire the right CSO and the right CMO. And so understanding all those aspects, I think, for the CEO is really, really critical.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm just going to take a quick question, because it relates to the discussion that we're having. Thank you, Linda Siegel, for your question. She's highlighted, which I think we recognize, is early stage companies and startups with limited budgets can only bring in certain roles into the company versus outsourcing or using consultants. What do you think as investors are the critical? I think, we've heard from the CSO. Claire, you mentioned someone having, or companies having CFOs as desirable and important. But if we were to make trade-offs here, what would you trade off to potentially outsource or use a consultancy? What do you think are the top three most important in early stage?
Yeah, definitely CFO is a good program to have. It's not needed from the beginning. Financial management, usually companies are light on that front at the beginning. I think definitely science around the innovation. So a good chief scientific officer, or if we're talking tech CTO, or product manager, if we're going marketing. So I think it depends on the company's core. But core is really the keyword. Like, depending on what's the profile of the company, where they want to go, a good understanding of what the problem they want to solve, and so that depends. That could be these different roles. CEO definitely from the beginning, because that's going to be the captain in the plane. Super important. And so the other functions can definitely be consulted, or it could be sometime when the company is really early, it could be advisors, sometimes not paid, connections. That's where the I would say the network serves really the entrepreneurship machine.
Yeah, I would also add, you might be cash strapped and not have a lot of cash, but you have the equity in the company. And if you have articulated, you as a founder or whoever's doing the initial recruiting has articulated a strong vision, and has assembled a good team of people and advisors around them. You should be able to recruit some of these top positions, and lure them in with generous equity compensation and the dream that this will be a billion-dollar company. And if you have 4% of it, that's $40 million, and you're going to be a very rich person. So I think that that although you might be cash strapped, if it's truly an exciting story, that it can be solved with equity and your networks.
No, thanks, Ellen. And Claire, you mentioned too, if you're unable to bring someone in as well, maybe it's an advisory board person to support. So that leads us into the next section, which is, thinking about developing boards. And when startups and early stage companies are considering the development of board advisors, what are some of the considerations they should take in? Ken, let me start with you. As you developed your advisory board and board membership, what are some of the considerations that you took in that you thought were extremely helpful?
Yeah, I think I would break it down, Sally, into two stages. One was, that early stage and sort of strategic tone setting time. And there, I think it was really important to have people on the board and around the boardroom that were, able to sort of go through strategic, more abstract exercises. They're synthesizing through, a platform of science and, execution strategies. While the work was going on with management, you needed a group of people that were sort of able to play a role that was not just approving things, but also listening and providing feedback. And I think that, what I found is that those types of people came from many different walks. I mean, there were people with regulatory backgrounds, there were people with large organizational backgrounds in big pharma, there were people that came directly from a whole spectrum of years of, experience in venture capital, where they had seen a lot of transactions and teams and examples, like the questions you're asking of Ellen and Claire, give me examples of things that you have seen, good and bad. Shortly after that, it moved into a very executional role mode for the board in order to support going from, private to public in particular. And, I guess I'll pause, and I'm sure we'll get to that transition at some point. But, very early on, having that experience and creativity to help steer management. And as CEO, I was an active participant. I was part of that board as well. So my own involvement in those discussions was important.
And when you built your board, did you have sort of a number of individuals in mind, or was it really adding to the board based on your needs in the stage of the company development?
Selfishly, for the entrepreneur, fewer board members is always better in my experience. And I know a lot of peers that share that view, and maybe board members too, right? I mean, multi-body problems are always more complicated than single body. But the truth is, it's a lot of, I think, early boardroom work around, a CEO and maybe founders is actually based in our industry on a lot of pre-existing relationships. And, I know that our board, early on, and even sometime transitioning later, was built on, previous experience with people of diverse backgrounds, people that, maybe they had worked on different types of projects and different experiences in different ways. Again, kind of coming together to sort of build trust in a team to tackle, these all sorts of problems that come the way of early stage companies. I think we landed on, 5 people, out of the gate as something that was a good critical mass to get sort of enough diverse thinking, enough backgrounds of experience, and sort of breadth of understanding to be able to navigate, the first 4 or 5 years of REGENXBIO's history.
Great, thank you. Ellen, could you add to that? And maybe
Sure.
the advice that you offer the companies in your portfolio too, in regards to board advisors?
I missed the middle part of your question, but sorry.
Sorry. No, let me repeat myself. Just to add on to Ken and what you think early stage companies should consider in developing their advisors, maybe some of the suggestions that you offer your company of portfolios, but your portfolio of companies.
Sure. So one thing that's really common early on is that, especially in venture-backed companies, obviously, is that the board is basically the investors and the CEO. Which is fine to some degree. It depends on who they are, of course, and they can add helpful expertise to the boardroom conversations. But I also think it's important to get industry experts on there early and to try to get independent board members on there. With a nod towards Ken's comment earlier of complicated situations with big boards early on can be really bad. I mean, I can even, like a 5-person board is really nice and comfortable. Early on, do you really need 9 board members? I can think of a few examples where there are 9 or 12 even, and it just gets completely out of hand, even from a scheduling standpoint. I mean, now during COVID, obviously everything's virtual, so it's a lot easier, but before, if we go back to flying and doing in-person board meetings and you want everyone there, how can you schedule it if you have that many people? And every time you need a consent, it can really be a problem. So I do think that trying to limit the number of investor board members to a small handful and trying to get some independence early on is advisable in my experience.
Great, thanks. And Claire, can I ask you to add into that and maybe share how JJDC sits on boards in companies that we make investments in at J&J?
Yeah, sure. So depending on the situation, we will take a board seat or we will be an observer of the board of directors. It's mostly most of the cases fit into one of those 2 categories. And the reason for that is really our job in the enterprise is to be aware, not only to better advise the company we invest in, but also to kind of keep in mind the long-term strategic mutual benefit and craft whatever we can on the partnership side. And we do that in a way that is firewalled and that protects both entities, is worth saying. So on the dynamic on the board are really interesting, and it's important to think of it as people are assembled, and there are shifts as well that are to be considered. And maybe I'm talking. I know Sally, you had maybe another time when you wanted to talk about the changes, but on board sometimes you shift from the friends and families to the welcome, institutional investors or strategic, and you have to rebalance a little bit things. It's not only because you have new investors that are like professional investors that you have to make those changes, but also sometimes for a better dynamic. So I heard of a company recently, for example, and it was like it's a family. They came together, and so the brother and sister are on the board. But at some point, you may want to so the discussions are more efficient. You may have to make some changes, and that's a good sign. When that happens, it's just because things are progressing, but it's not always easy for companies to let it go.
Yeah, I'll also add that I often, on the private side, when I make investments, it tends to be a little bit on the later stage. And if I know one of the board members, I will call them up and I will ask, what are the boardroom dynamics? Because when we're writing term sheets, we don't have capacity or Perceptive to take a lot of board seats. I'm completely maxed out and then some on 6 or so. And so we really try to take them as infrequently as possible. And if we trust the board and we trust everyone on there, we're a little bit more hands off than if we don't. And actually at times, if I get a red flag about the board dynamics and what may or may not happen, then I don't, I might not even make the investment. So one of the concerns that's kind of high in my mind is, for example, if we're coming in at a Series C or D, like we did with Ken's company, Regenex, the early investors might be at the end of their fund life. They might be, and they might control the board. And so they might want to sell the company for what for them is a huge step up from the price that they got to the company, but for me is small. And, I see the vision of this company as becoming really, really large. And that's why I'm doing this late stage investment. And so I've had that happen once or twice. And since then I've learned it's really important to be present for those, for those situations and take a board seat and have a little bit more control than one where that's less of a problem. So I think that that's something common for kind of the later stages, crossover type round investments.
Thanks, Ellen. So I'm going to take a question here because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about at the moment. Thank you, Michael Salgaller, who has asked, small companies raising their first substantial are often urged to bring in someone with large biopharma experience. However, there can be a culture clash between the startup and this type of person since the environments are quite different. How do you think that could be addressed?
Do they mean to the board or into the company or both?
Looks like urged to bring in the company's urged to bring in someone from big pharma experience. It sounds like maybe from the board. However, there can be culture
to the
clash.
board.
To the company.
To the company, yeah.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay. Right. Because I was going to say for the board, I think it's less of an issue because the culture clash, you're just pulling on their expertise and their networks. For the company, I agree. It's a little bit of a transition, and you need to find someone who really has that, that entrepreneurial drive. And there are a lot of, executives out there who actually have both. And there's a lot of examples of people who have gone from leading organizations in pharma to wanting to go into smaller companies and lead organizations there and have been really, really successful because, they do know how drug development is done and have seen many drugs go through it, which is the advantage of that kind of experience. So I see the concern, but I also have seen it, succeed in many instances. So it's very person to person dependent and perhaps important to understand their motivations and style of management.
Yeah, I can add to that. I fully agree with you, Ellen, and I think it's part of the selection of the right people at the right time, right? Because you also have on the positive side, because I recognize difference in culture potentially, but that's part of the diversity dynamic we're talking about. There's no clash between a team of clinicians, but they may be between clinicians and marketing or a smaller company, big pharma. But I wanted to add that. Usually the appetite from a big pharma executive to join startups is the agility and that entrepreneur opportunity. And so I think that's something that needs to be confirmed when these people join, but usually tremendous value added.
Great, thanks, Claire. So something we've talked about is transitioning. So companies early stage transitioning to later stage, going from very early funding, friends and family, angel investing, now to later series. Ken, we had talked about this. You had mentioned, when we were talking about the panel today, how do you see the need for resources shifting? I think there's the obvious, right? As you grow your team, you're growing more resources, but maybe we think about the individuals at the leadership team level and shifting. And then we can talk about, the advisory board again, how those resources are needed to shift.
Yeah, I think, we all know that, the development product cycle timelines in our industry are very long. And so, there's not a lot of examples that I know of where, private companies with early stage or even fully private financing are just ready to go and launch into the commercial market. So there's always this transition, into the public capital market in most cases. And I think that's where some of the biggest changes and impact that I see occurring. Ellen referred to the fact that, when you're seeking kind of expertise, experience, leadership early on, it's highly dependent on what is the technology, what is the therapeutic area, what sort of background do you want in that chief science officer? What do you want even in the CEO? She mentioned having someone who understands business and science. And that is incredibly important. And then you have to map that onto what is the CEO's job of a public company compared to what it is in the private, stages of development. And, it starts to occupy a whole nother part of the pie chart in terms of interaction with the public capital markets. And, I think that's one of those transitions. It's not just the CEO, of course, it's the CFO, and a lot of people would expect that, but also what about that chief science officer? What about the chief medical officer when you're going to be reporting out data or updating the public markets on, changes that are occurring, especially in a small or mid-cap company where that is the focus, the role that and the time that leaders need to dedicate to those things, become a new sort of key exercise for thinking about how to recruit talent and grow. And, that is addressed at the next level of the company, being able to support that clinical development team or, people in those roles that can execute on the operations day to day. I think that is one of the things that certainly has the biggest, and I think expected, but I can tell you, from a perspective of a first-time CEO like myself, or the reference to a large pharma person coming into a CEO role, that is one of the least experienced areas for that phenotype of leader and leadership. When you get the CEO that's, been through a life cycle of a small mid-cap company before, they're more familiar with that, but it's certainly something I think that we're, all focused on and aware of in these transitions.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Ellen, can you add on to that? Maybe talk about a success story that you've seen, or even a company that's failed because of made some poor decisions and resources.
So I guess echoing what Ken says, and since we were talking about the board before, I think if a CEO doesn't have a lot of, or leadership team doesn't have a lot of experience as a public market CEO, and everybody has to do it for the first time at some point, they can lead on the board. And hopefully if they have done, something that's really popular in our field now is that crossover round, that last round, which is before the IPO, where you are bringing in investors who have a lot of public market experience. Hopefully you have some board members who have had some experience also at that point at publicly traded companies. And so then you can lean on those board members for advice and really have them guide you through this. I think at that point, picking the banks and picking the analysts and all these things become really, really important. You need to have a lot more advocates around, and like Ken alluded to or mentioned, how do you present the clinical data? Can you compare it to all the competitors? All this is work is done in such a speedy time in the public markets versus the private, where there's lots of time to disseminate it and talk about it and look at patient level data. That's something that you never really get in the public market. So I think having that experience is nice, but if you can't have it, lean on your board for it. Try to get it somewhere else in the company. Maybe find someone who is not the CEO but a lower level executive who can help because they've done this before. So
great, thanks. Claire, anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, you talked about the transition, and I think it's really like phenotypes in biology, right? The CEO of the very early company is a different phenotype and it's probably more sciencey, techie, or kind of product person, and maybe the one that is growing the company through the private fundraising events is more of an operational / strategy, and maybe the one getting to the private market is like the grown-up, like business, like who watch not only internally what everything's happening internally, but building a coalition externally and watch every word, every signal that the company is sending out there. This phenotype sometimes corresponds to growth of individuals. It's not like everybody in the company that's going to grow with the company, but it happens that some individuals can grow and change hats and take the company further. But it needs to be recognized, and it's easier for the company when they are, and for the management, when they are aware of that. Because when there's recognition that there will be transition and they may have to give up their role, that's helpful for everybody.
Thanks. Well, I think we're going to transition to Q&A with the audience members. Just to remind everyone, the topic of discussion here is human resources as a strategy, building a team to ensure success and to attract investors. We would love to hear your questions and answer those questions. If you will just drop those into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll pull those up and answer those moving forward, or I will continue asking some questions of the panelists. I'm gonna give it a minute or two and see if anyone has some questions that we haven't already touched on or answered. No questions? So this is something I think that, Ellen, would be a great question for you regards to those looking to step into the biotech equity space. What are the essential skill sets and steps that are needed to be there?
Like as an investor, or you mean on the other side?
It looks like, yes, stepping into corporate, into venture capital.
Okay, okay, coming as a postdoc, am I seeing that? No.
Not as an investor. Yes,
So
as a postdoc, not as an investor. Yeah, yes, into your world.
Wants to transition to being, yeah, got it. Okay. So there's a lot of different routes. I think that there's a lot of the most common, frankly, is to get a job either on the sell side, which is you know, the equity research sell side at a major bank, and to get trained there, because you gotta learn some of the business, but a lot of it is pretty easy to learn on the job. Another easy thing to do, or something that I always tell people is helpful, is while you're doing your postdoc or your PhD, there's usually programs in lots of those cities that kind of help early stage startups raise money. I did that while I was in grad school for 3 years. I would help them with their business pitches. I'd, you know, try to ally with or align myself with the business and the law schools from Columbia and NYU, and work with them on projects. And so that really helped kind of build my network within New York City, which isn't a huge biotech hub, but does have some. And so actually makes it really easy to get to know everybody really, really fast. So I think kind of building your network while you're there, trying to get a job in equity research, whether it's the sell side first, an internship at a buy side place can always also help. At a fund. And then the other route that sometimes people go is consulting, is go to, you know, one of the big consulting shops and kind of basically get your MBA there early on. I think that's what I see most commonly. Obviously, it's not a very easy transition because it is very, you know, different from the PhD postdoc world that you're there, but lots of people do it, and I think that having a PhD or an MD as background is now almost a requirement. So when I talk to young people who are trying to decide, you know, after college or early grad school, and they don't want to finish their PhD, I always tell them, you're so close. Like, please finish it. It's very, very important, and really helps build credibility, I think, in the learning space.
Thanks, Ellen. So we had another question in regards to opportunities for postdocs and entering the ecosystem through startup companies, which I think is a great avenue for postdocs to start or enter into entrepreneurship and startups. Could I put you on the spot? Is there's some thoughts you have there on what you see across the ecosystem here in Maryland with opportunities for postdocs?
Yeah, we've been growing our R&D team a lot lately at Regenix Bio, and you know, as Ellen alluded to, I mean, specifically the ecosystem around here that's been interesting is, you know, been places like the NIH and Hopkins and the academic institutes. What I find would be useful in terms of, you know, we're actively seeking those people, and we're going to those campuses and, you know, working with a number of others in this area to kind of communicate that there are, you know, work opportunities for postdocs in, in industry, which I know even as they transition in, they're surprised because they're in like postdoc mode of like, thinking about that they're going to do science and academia forever, enlightening their minds. I do like the idea, and I think places like NIH and other institutions having these tech transfer offices or having the ability to kind of probe a little bit about what those activities are while you're in a postdoc near and around some of those potential avenues could be interesting for people to explore. And my sense has been from talking to the institutions around here, they love that. They love it when the scientists in their institutions come forward and want to sort of learn more about tech transfer and the business side of things. So, I think that it's a very rich opportunity, even in places that, people may not realize are there, that they're receptive to that.
Great. And staying on the talent side and coming in, another question is, what does the bio industry need besides biotech degrees? And I think we've talked about having individuals on the finance side, having individuals on the business side. So certainly advanced finance degrees or MBAs are crucial as people pull together a company as the company moves in through different stages. Ellen, anything you would like to add on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of alluded to it earlier. I think that, when you're deciding to go to school, you're deciding not to get on the job training, right? Every year is something that that is a trade-off one way or the other. And so I think that actually maybe not a mistake, but one thing I say often to people who are younger is don't feel like you need to also get an MBA if you already have a PhD or whatever it is. Like, don't over degree yourself. At some point, like, jump into an industry job, even if it's not perfect. Get that like low level business development job at a pharma or biotech company, so you're looking around at things. And that's if you want to go the investor route, of course. Within the biotech world itself, I mean, I don't know, Ken's going to be better able to speak to what are the other skill sets that you really need. But obviously HR is important, like manufacturing is important. That's related to biotech or to the science degrees. But that's kind of what comes to mind.
That question, Sally, looked like it was related to sort of experience and training and education that I saw in the chat. Let me emphasize another point. What do we need as companies in biotech? More diversity. We need more upstream investment and awareness from people in especially racial minority communities, Black, Brown, Latino, finding pathways into biotech. It doesn't map on to the general population and what we're seeing in our industry. A lot of us are taking inventory of that. We are, especially at Regenix Bio, and looking at the sort of community and where and how we can recruit from. And it's not going to be an easy transition because so many of the people that are doing postdocs and graduate work and MBAs right now are also probably not as diverse as we would like to be coming into our industry. So I agree with all of that training and expertise. And I think there are lots of different jobs in biotech. When you think about it end to end, research all the way through to, commercial, we certainly need more focus on diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Ken. Incredibly important. We know diversity around the table is important, not to just our patients and consumers, but we know the outcomes on delivery, on the financing, the data, the metrics is there to show us that when you have a bigger, better diversity around the table, it translates. Claire, would you like to add anything to that question that we were talking about?
Yeah, I think the discussion about I totally agree on the diversity, and I think it's a two-way street. Like, it brings a lot to the companies and to the ecosystem, and it's important for big corporation or finance to give jobs and give back to all layers of society. So I think that's really important. But back to the career track and what kind of diploma, what kind of there's always there's something I will bring, which is like experience in a big firm. whether it's not only, so it could really be anything that gets you learning and exposed. So I think a job at, for example, a big pharma or Johnson & Johnson or a big consulting firm is interesting as well, because you basically learn what should that might, and if later down the road you go into the entrepreneurial area and get a CEO job in a company, you know what the end product should look like, because basically you know who's going to acquire you or invest in you. And so that's an interesting way to do it. But yeah, there is no one way. Like each trajectory is really tailored to each individual, but there's no mandatory diploma that's expected. I think that was the question around the and even you know, PhDs and postdoc are fantastic, but some people do not have the PhD and the postdoc, and I think they can bring value as well. So it's in summary, there's room for everybody, and it's very much tailored to the opportunity that will make you grow. And if you want to be part of something that grows as well, like a company or a discovery effort, science, then this is sufficient. This is a sufficiently interesting step to build on. I got my MBA very late in life, and it was not mandatory. It was just good time for me.
And I can second that too, Claire. Right. So, and I think it speaks to what Ellen was mentioning earlier, which is the more time you're in school, the less time you're not in a company experiencing, growing, and developing that way. So yes, recommend get in there, join companies, and don't be afraid to put off a degree till you have a few years experience. And sometimes that helps shape your next decisions on additional degrees. So I am going to end our session here today on that note, and thanks to our panelists for the topic of conversations today. I think we hit on a lot of different points, and thank you for joining the Maryland Bioinnovation Conference. I'm going to ask our panelists if they would like to. You can add your email into the chat box if you would like for any further contact for the individuals that are still here on our session. And we'll leave it there. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the conference, and thanks for joining me today with this great panel.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.